All right, in this video, we're going to do something very different, very off the wall, very kind of cool and peculiar, and it's not even going to fully work when we're done. It's going to have a few quirks with it, and that's okay. This is just an experiment. As you've probably heard by now, there's this thing called OpenAI, and more specifically, there is an implementation or a version of OpenAI's, I don't know what you call it, that their library or their definition called GPT-3 that just recently was released. And it does some really cool things. And you may have even seen on Twitter or other places where people are using ChatGPT to ask questions of OpenAI, to ask it questions, to do their homework, to do some of their work for them, to write rap songs, to create poetry, whatever. And it can ask questions. It can do pretty much whatever you want to do, and it's actually pretty smart. Now, it's not perfect. I grant you, I've actually tried it out myself, and for a lot of things, it actually does a pretty good job. I've even tried, though, asking it questions about the rules for different board games and stuff, and while it does give an answer that appears that it knows what the board game is, the rules that it gives me for pretty much every board game I've asked it are dead wrong. And so, your mileage will vary. Nevertheless, it's pretty cool. And so what I thought I would do is create an Alexa skill that uses OpenAI GPT-3 as its source of information. So you can ask it anything you want. So to do that, what we're going to say is we're going to create, oops, I got a little bit ahead of myself there. We're going to create a new project. So ask new, it's going to be Node.js, it's going to be Alexa host, it's going to be US East 1. We're going to call it Mr. Know-It-All. It's going to put it in a folder called Mr. Know-It-All. And it's going to take about a minute for it to create the skill, to set it up, and to clone it to my local directory so that we can start to work on it. Now, I don't want to have you wait for that. So hang tight, and in post-editing, I will cut out the wait time. All right, it looks like it's almost done. So here we go. All right, the first thing we're going to do, because if we don't do this, I'm going to forget, and it's a pretty important step, is we need to install the OpenAI library. Now we say npm install prefix. Now we have to say prefix because all of our Lambda code, all of our Node.js code is actually living in a directory called Lambda. So I say prefix Lambda, and then tell it to install the OpenAI library. Cool. Now we're ready to open that thing up. We're going to make a few changes to the interaction model. I don't know why, apparently GitHub Copilot's not cooperating right now. That's okay. I'll make a few changes to the interaction model. The most urgent one we need to make is we need to give it a different invocation name. This is, for those of you who aren't familiar with Alexa skills, an invocation name is essentially how you launch the skill. You would say something like open, in this case, change me, or ask change me to do this, or something like that. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to change it from change me, because that's what it's telling me to do, to something more meaningful, such as Mr. Know-It-All. Great. Now we have all the other intents that we get for free because we created this as from the Hello World template. In a real world app, I might consider ditching the Hello World intent, maybe a few others, and maybe even adding a few. I'm not going to worry about that right now. I'm going to leave those in place, at least for now. And instead, I'm going to create a brand new intent. Now the good thing is I'm using VS Code, and I have some fragments in VS Code that do a lot of the typing for me, so I don't have to type all that JSON out there. Instead, I'm going to just create a brand new intent called Ask OpenAI. It's going to be called Ask OpenAI intent. It's going to ask questions. You're going to be able to ask it questions like ask question, or maybe I say what is question, or maybe I say tell me about question. Or I could come up with several others, but that's fine for now. So what is question? What is that placeholder question? Well, that is a slot. Oops, I got ahead of myself there. That is a slot of type Amazon search query. Now, most of Alexa's types, whether they be numbers or movies or books or whatever the built-in types are, or even your custom types that you may create, most of those types are used primarily to help Alexa, to help the natural language understanding sort out what you meant and sort out what it thinks it heard. For example, if you're in a crowded room or you have a heavy accent or you have a scratchy throat and you were to say the word New York, if your slot type is type US city, it's going to still sort that out. It's going to say, well, I didn't quite understand it, but it sort of sounded like New York. It is supposed to be a city in that spot, so I'm going to just assume it's New York, and it'll sort that out. If you said Newark, it might be confused and think it's New York too under those circumstances, because both of those are cities, but your mileage will vary. Okay, with that said though, Amazon search query is unlike the other types. Amazon search query is open-ended. It doesn't do any sort of comparison. It doesn't offer any help to the natural language understanding. It basically takes whatever Alexa hears and returns that as the slot value. So based on the way I've defined the Ask OpenAI intent here, if I were to say ask, what is pizza? Then the question slot will have the value, what is pizza? And if I misspoke or it misheard me, it's going to take whatever it heard and it's going to pass that to me as well. And that's okay. For our purposes here, this is fine. So I'm going to leave these. This is fine. We've just defined the OpenAI intent. So now we need to come over here to the Lambda, where we're going to do our code. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new file called keys.js, because when you work with the OpenAI API, you do need an API key. And I'm going to define it in here. I'm going to say module.exports.open, I'm going to call it OpenAI key, and I'm going to type in my key here. Now I'm going to do this while you're not looking because, I don't want you to use my key. So I'm going to go ahead and type it in here, and in the post-editing, I'm going to remove this so you're not going to see it. And that's okay. You're going to need to go to OpenAI and get your own API key. So I'll be with you on the other side of this once I've got my key defined. All right, cool. I've just created my key. I've created it in keys.js. It's been saved. It's ready to roll. So now I'm ready to actually use it. Now, again, you're going to have to go get your own API key and fill it in keys. But I'm going to use this. I'm going to use what's here. What is my own? Next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to load up the OpenAI library. And there's two things I needed out of this. I need configuration, and I need the actual OpenAI API. And I need to get that, well, there's a lot of typing it decided it was going to help me with there. I need to get that from require OpenAI. There. So I now have those things, and now I need to define the configuration. So I'm going to say const config equal configuration. That's fine. So far, so good. It needs an API key. Again, what I'm using here is GitHub Copilot, and it's actually making some good suggestions for me. Now, normally I could hard code my key here, but I don't want to do that because I don't want you to see it. So instead, I'm going to say keys dot open AI key, and that'll be good enough for our purposes. Now, I don't have that defined yet, so I need to import that as well. So I need to say const keys equal require keys. All right, so that just brought that in, and we're ready to roll. We've got our configuration so that it knows my API key. We've required that from an external local module, and we have our configuration set up. Now we're ready to use OpenAI. So I'm going to create an OpenAI instance, and it's going to be new OpenAI API, and we're going to pass in the configuration. Once again, GitHub Copilot has done exactly what I wanted it to do, so I'm going to take its suggestion and move on. Cool. So now I need to create an Ask OpenAI intent handler. Well, good news is I have a fragment that helps me do that. So Ask OpenAI intent handler. Notice that's gone ahead and filled in the request, the intent name is ask OpenAI intent, so that should match what we already have. Now, I'm going to forget this if I don't do it now, so the first thing I'm going to do is, now that I've got this defined, I need to come down here to the bottom and register that with my skill builder. So if I don't do it now, I'm going to forget it, and I'm going to be frustrated as to why things didn't work. But now that I've done that, I'm ready to implement this. So how are we going to do it? Well, first off, I need to get the question. I need to pull that question out of the slot. So I'm going to say Alexa.get slot value. I'm going to need to pass in the handler input, and let's see what it's offered for me. Yes, I'm going to pass in the handler input, and I am going to ask it for the handler input. From that, I'm going to get the request envelope, and I'm going to ask it for the question slot. Now, so that we don't have to scroll around so much, I'm going to break this up onto another line. There we go. Cool. Now that I have the question, I've got the value. So whatever the user said, if the user said ask what is pizza, then the value of question should be pizza here. All right, ignore what Copilot's suggesting now because it's not really doing anything terribly useful. But I do need to say response equal, and now the OpenAI is asynchronous, so I have to say await. Now if I have to say await here, then I also have to be sure and make this async there. So await OpenAI.create completion. I'm not even sure if that's right. That's bogus. Create completion. And what a completion is essentially, the idea is you're typing in some text and it's completing the text for you. I'm not going to really do that so much here, but I am going to pass in some other information that might result in an answer that I'm looking for. So I'm going to say model. I'm going to say text DaVinci 003. That's the version of the model that we're using. There's actually several different models. Of course, if there is a text DaVinci 003, there's also an 002 and an 001 as well. And there's in my understanding that 004 is the next in line. There's also one called Code DaVinci that has a little bit more, as I understand it, I don't know a lot about it, but it's my understanding it has a little bit more to do with generating source code. Although Text DaVinci seems to do a decent job at that as well. I need to pass it a prompt. So the prompt is the thing that we're going to ask of OpenAI, and that is our question. That is the question that we pulled out of the slot. I'm going to add a temperature. Now the temperature can be anything between 0 and 1, and it really boils down to how much randomness or how much variation there are in responses if the user asks the same question twice. And so if you set it to 0, there's not going to be a lot of variation. If you set it to 1, there's going to be a lot of variation each time it's asked. But the trade-off is accuracy. When it's 0, it's more likely to be that the answer is going to be fairly accurate, and if it's 1, it's going to be potentially go off the rails and come up with any number of goofy answers you might think of. For now, I'm going to go ahead and go with 0 for accuracy. I don't really care so much about variation. So for now, we'll go with that. But it's my understanding that if you set it to somewhere between 0.6 and 0.9 and fine-tune it, those are usually good answers for you. It's a good setting. I'm going to set the max tokens. Set max tokens. Now max tokens is how many tokens. Now it's really hard to describe what a token is. You might think of it as words, but it's really not words either. But long story short is how many tokens are available for the response. And if you're not careful, if you don't give enough tokens, it sometimes cuts off the response mid-sentence. And so 100 is fine for short answers, but I've learned for most things I can get away with about 1,500, and it gives me any answer I want. The top P, I honestly don't know what that is. Frequency penalty, I honestly likewise don't know what that is. I'm going to set that as 0, and the presence penalty also 0. Again, this is just a work in progress, and these are properties that are important that you set, but I don't know what they mean, and I haven't bothered looking them up and getting to know them yet. But certainly, max tokens, temperature, question itself, the prompt, and of course the model are the most important things we could set. All right. With that said, we've done that. We've asked it, and we've We've asked it for some information and we've got a response back, presumably. So we're going to say const.speakOutput is response.data.choices.text. This is actually going to give us back our answer as some output. Now I've got const speak output twice in here. I don't need it in there twice. I'm going to remove it there. And I'm going to just let it say speak output, but so I don't leave things crazy here, just out in the open. I'm going to say reprompt, what else, what else can I help you with? Great. And what reprompt does is after it's given the response, if the user, first off, it leaves the microphone open, but also after the user, if the user doesn't say anything after a few seconds, it'll reprompt them. It'll ask them again. Now, what I do want to do here is after my speak output, I do want to go ahead and say the same thing, because otherwise it's going to say the answer and then it's going to leave the microphone open with no question. So it's a good opportunity here to go ahead and say things like, what more would you like to know? Great. And I think that's it. Let's give it a shot. So to do that, I'm going to say get add, because this is an Alexa hosted skill, and Alexa hosted skills are very much get oriented. I'm going to say commit, initial commit, push, and all we need to do now is wait for this to be pushed and wait for the CI server on the other end to pick this up, deploy it, and then we can try it out. Now that'll take a few moments, so I'm going to wait and I'll come back to you after my post-editing of the wait time has been removed. All right, it's finished deploying, and while I was waiting and while in the part of the video that was edited out, I did a quick test of it to make sure it was going to work before I came back and was all surprised on video that it didn't work. And it didn't work, to be honest with you. And it was just a few small tweaks, and I wanted to be honest with you. I didn't want you to see the mistakes, but I wanted to be honest with you and show you what mistakes I did make so that you could fix them earlier. And one of the things I did is I was requiring keys with lowercase k, but as you can see over here, the name of the module has an uppercase K. So I changed that, and that fixed that problem. The other problem I had, and it wasn't a big problem, but I didn't have a space between the response that OpenAI gave me and the what more would you like to know question. And so it sort of ran the two together. At the very end of the response, it just immediately just threw out what more would you like to know, just without any pause whatsoever. So I put a space in here. Those are the only changes I made. And so just adding a space and capitalizing the K, and everything seems to have been deployed and works now. So let me pull over the test console and we'll give this a spin. If you've never seen the test console, it's one of the ways you can interact with your Alexa skill, and you can do things like, say, open Mr. Know-It-All. Oops, I mistyped it. It didn't like what I did. So let me do it again. Open Mr. Know-It-All. There we go.
Welcome. You can say hello or help. Which would you like to try?
All right, so it said, welcome, you can say hello or help, which we'd like to try. That actually is coming from the launch request. We didn't change the launch request, but if I were to actually decide to push this into production someday, I'd probably change it to something of like, hello and welcome to Mr. Know-It-All. I know everything. What would you like to know? Things like that. I might change it to something more appropriate. We're going to leave it alone for now. We're going to leave it as is. I'm just going to ask it a very simple question. Ask, what is pizza?
Pizza is a savory dish of Italian origin, consisting of a usually round, flattened base of leavened wheat-based dough topped with tomatoes, cheese, and various other ingredients baked at a high temperature, traditionally in a wood-fired oven. What more would you like to know?
And so now I can ask a different question. I can let's try something fun. Ask, write a poem about pizza.
Pizza, oh pizza, you are so divine, your cheesy goodness is so sublime, your crust is so crunchy, your sauce so sweet, your toppings so savory, a real treat. Your aroma so tantalizing, it fills the air, your flavor so delightful, it's hard to compare, your beauty so captivating, It's hard to resist your presence so inviting. It's hard to dismiss. Your slice is so perfect. Your shape so round, your cheese so gooey. Your toppings abound, your taste so delicious. It's hard to deny your presence so comforting. It's hard to say goodbye. Pizza, oh pizza, you are so divine, your cheesy goodness is so sublime. What more would you like to know?
Well, that was interesting. First off, it was actually a fairly decent poem. It rhymed. She read it out loud. There's a few places where commas would have been helpful to create pauses in there and things ran together. So it's not perfect, but it's not bad. And the idea was that I didn't create knowledge of writing poems about pizza into my Alexa skill. That's all in OpenAI, in GPT-3. I just use the AI, the OpenAI API, to ask it questions like this. Now, there are some cases where this may or may not work. In fact, here's one I don't think will work. We're going to try it anyway. We're going to say ask, list the top teams in the NFC East. Oh.
1. Philadelphia Eagles 2. Dallas Cowboys 3. Washington Football Team 4. New York Giants. What more would you like to know?
I'm actually surprised that worked for a couple of reasons. First off, it's a list, and I've done some experiments in the past where the text that I'm given back from OpenAI for a list is something that doesn't quite render properly as speech on Alexa, and so it would require some filtering or some tweaking, manipulation on my end inside of my skill to make it work in Alexa. But in this case, it seemed to work just fine. And number two is I actually do, if I'm not mistaken, that is actually the correct standings of the NFC East in my currently. I could be wrong, but I think that's correct. And if so, it's interesting to me because my understanding was OpenGPT was only up good through 2021. It was trained on data through then. So the fact that it's given me some information that seems more current is curious. Now, this also may have been accurate in late 2021. I don't know. I honestly don't know the answer to that. Incidentally, I can ask my skill that I've just created, the Mr. Know-It-All skill. I can talk to it instead of talking to it through this developer console. I can talk to it on my device. So let's try that. Alexa, ask Mr. Know-It-All, list the top teams in the NFC East.
The current standings in the NFC East are as follows. The Eagles are first, followed by the Cowboys in second, the Giants in third, and the Commanders in fourth.
Well, that's interesting. That actually did tell me what I wanted to know, but it didn't go through my skill to do that because I can see in the response that it has more information than what I would have got. Let's try that one more time. Alexa, open Mr. Know-It-All.
Welcome. You can say hello or help. Which would you like to try?
Ask, what is pizza?
Pizza is a savory dish of Italian origin, consisting of a usually round, flattened base of leavened wheat-based dough topped with tomatoes, cheese, and various other ingredients baked at a high temperature, traditionally in a wood-fired oven. What more would you like to know?
That's all.
Goodbye.
All right. Now, this is just an experiment. There's a lot of quirks and things that we probably need to sort out before we would go to production with this. But for experimental purposes, it's perfectly good. It does what we want to do. It simply takes, as we showed here, it takes the slot, the question slot, out of the utterance or out of the intent. It feeds it to the OpenAI create completion API call. It takes what it gets back, adds that to the speech output along with a closing phrase of what more would you like to know. And then it sends that response and reprompts later if nobody answers. All right, this has been a lot of fun. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. Using Alexa to ask any sorts of questions is always a very useful thing, and if those questions can be answered by some back-end API, that's great. And when that back-end API is open API, then the answers can actually be quite astonishing and somewhat amusing in the case of pizza poetry. But again, thank you for watching. Follow me on Twitter. Tell other friends about it. Follow me on Mastodon. This is a slightly different Mastodon address than I had on my last few videos. I've switched over to a different Mastodon server, so follow me there. If you search for Habuma on Mastodon on any whatever server you're on, it'll find me. Or email me if you have any questions. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'll try my best to get back to you. Check out my books. They make great gifts. Holidays are coming up. The one on the left there has a lot to do with what we've covered in this video. It doesn't cover anything with OpenGPT, but it does talk about building talking applications for Alexa. The book on the right is the other thing I'm terribly interested in, that is the Spring Framework. It covers Spring Boot and Spring Framework, as well as other parts of the Spring portfolio. Again, thank you very much, and tune in next time. There's going to be more videos. I've already got several videos already recorded. I just need to edit them on different topics, both Alexa and Spring oriented. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.